All right, well, so far we've talked a lot about inventions and inventors. We've talked about the way the railroad changed the world and how all of this stuff was really affecting American life. Well, today we're going to take a look at big business and labor, okay? We're going to look at the various companies that were turning out different products around the country at the time, and we're going to look at the people who were actually doing the work. Now, sometimes management, the big business, and labor, the workers, got along fantastically well. Other times, things didn't go quite that swimmingly. Okay. First person we're going to talk about is a guy by the name of Andrew Carnegie. Now, I've seen it pronounced both Carnegie and Carnegie, so I leave that up to you. But this man was an innovator. This was a very smart individual. This is the guy who went to England, saw the Bessemer process, and realized what that could do for the United States. He's the one who brought the Bessemer process over to America. Now, among his innovations, we're going to talk about business strategies first and foremost, okay? And he had some that were really ahead of his time. For example, first and foremost, he continuously searched for ways to make better products more cheaply. He understood that people wanted a good product. Now, don't take this to mean that he was trying to make a cheap product, okay? He was trying to produce the highest quality steel that he could. Now, the idea here is if you can figure out the way to make it cheaper, then you're going to have more profit. It's going to end up giving you a better bottom line. It's going to help you to make more money, in other words. And what's more, people are going to understand that you have a good product. This is going to help you with repeat business. Okay, everybody's going to know that Carnegie steel, for example, would be the best in the world, and that's what they wanted to buy. He was not the only steel magnate at the time, but he was the predominant one. Okay, now, secondly, he attracted talented people by offering them stock in the company. Now, stock is a partial ownership of a particular company. So what he would do is he would hire people to work for him, and then not only would they get a paycheck, but they would also get partial ownership in the company. Now, what this meant was that if the company did well, you would have more, your stock would be worth more, and you would have more wealth coming in. Okay, and so this gave them the incentive to help the company succeed because it was in their own best interest. He also encouraged competition among his assistants. He wanted to get the best ideas, the best plans, all these different things, and he felt that the way you go about doing that is you go through and you let the workers figure it out on their own. You let them compete in the marketplace of ideas. Think about it like sports. Okay, you have baseball, you have all the teams playing throughout the year, and they keep narrowing it down further and further until you only have one champion. That's what they were looking at here. It was the hope that they would be able to work and compete and figure out what was going to be the best thing. He wanted his assistants to come up with the better and better ideas. Okay, now, one of the biggest things that he helped create is something known as vertical integration. Now, Carnegie was a steel maker. Okay, now where do we get steel? Okay, well, it starts off as iron ore. Okay, so let's say you have a steel mill somewhere. You want to make steel. You're going to use the Bessemer process. You're going to make $1 billion or ever how much you can make. You go through and you dig the ore out of the ground first. Okay, well, that's just the first step. Now you got to get the ore from wherever you dug it out of the ground to where the steel mill is. Now, a couple ways you could do that. If it's just over land, you can use a train. If it's across the Great Lakes, you have to get some kind of an ore freighter. Okay, but that's just the first step. Now you've got your ore at your company, but you also need to go through and try to keep the supply going of coal. Coal also has to be dug out of the ground and brought to wherever the factory is. Okay, now you have the iron ore, you have the coal to keep the fires burning, and you have the ability to produce steel. But what happens if somebody cuts off your supply of iron ore or they cut off your supply of steel? Well, then you're not going to be able to make any steel whatsoever. Your business can end up going bankrupt. Carnegie did not want to be basically held hostage by any of his suppliers. So this is what he worked on, okay? He bought his suppliers, okay? He bought the coal fields. He bought the land where they were actually digging the coal out of the ground. He bought the iron mines where they're digging the iron ore out of the ground. He bought ore freighters. He bought ships that would bring the iron ore across the Great Lakes. He bought his own railroad lines to make sure that he had an ample supply of all the stuff he needed to keep his business going. Carnegie was going to make sure that he could continuously make steel regardless of what was going on in the world around him. He was, like I said, he was not going to be held hostage. Now, this picture kind of shows what we're talking about. Okay, you look at the bottom. You've got iron mines, limestone quarries, and coal mines. Carnegie would buy all of those. Well, once you have those dug out of the ground, you have to transport it. So they go to a shipping facility. Now, be that an ore freighter, be it a train or whatnot, they now have to move it to the steel mill, which they would then do. Now that you've got all the stuff necessary at the steel mill, you can start to produce your steel. Carnegie wanted to pretty much control every level of production. He wanted to go all the way from the very moment they're digging it out of the ground to the moment they're rolling steel out of the factory. He wanted to control the raw materials and the transportation system. That way, no one could decide, well, I'm going to mess with Carnegie's business by interrupting his coal supply or his iron supply. And as such, he was able to produce products continuously regardless of what was going on around. Now, vertical integration was not the only new business strategy at the time. There was another type of integration. Now, this was referred to as horizontal integration, okay? Vertical integration up and down, where you went from the, everything in the ground through the finished product. Horizontal integration, that's going to be essentially from side to side. The way you run horizontal integration is you merge with your competitors. Now, the real master of horizontal integration was going to be a guy named John D. Rockefeller. What you do in this case, as I said, you purchase or you merge with your competitors, okay? Let's say, Rockefeller was all about oil. Let's say if instead it was about steel. You have all these independent steel mills. What you do is you go through and you purchase all of your competition. That way you are the one owner essentially of as much of the production as possible. Under horizontal integration, it's the idea that you want to be the only supplier of fill in the blank. Now, John D. Rockefeller wanted to be essentially the supplier of oil to the United States, and he did so quite well. He did form a monopoly where he was pretty much the only game in town, but at the same time, it also reduced the cost to the consumers considerably. So both of these are two very different types of integration, but both of them are just different ways that businessmen were trying to figure out how to run their organization, how to run their companies to get the maximum amount of profit possible.